Warning, this episode contains graphic and extreme violence. If you're familiar with this case, if you're a local of Nova Scotia or the Maritimes, if this story brings you pain or PTSD from the events, please skip this episode. I do not wish for any of my listeners to experience the trauma from this again. Listener discretion is advised. Hello and welcome to Northern Nightmares. I'm your host Andrew, and I'm glad to be back after my little vacation. Hopefully, you didn't miss me too much. Over the last couple weeks, I've spent some time preparing for this week's episode, and I will say it's not going to be a pleasant story. During 2020, the world shut down during the COVID-19 pandemic. We all spent our times locked away and trying to avoid getting sick. In April of that year, Nova Scotia was dealing with another crisis. This case I bring you not only involves a monster, but also a look at the inner workings of the RCMP. This incident could have been avoided given previous history with this individual, but we'll get to that later. This is the tragic story of the 2020 Nova Scotia mass shootings caused by Gabriel Wortman. Now, for this story, I'm going to keep to the solid facts, the details that are public knowledge. Now, for my listeners that are living in Nova Scotia and in the Maritimes, like myself, we all know of many connections. Connections to this case. We either have connections to the victims or know of the killer, or we are connected to someone that we know. There are, of course, rumors, theories, and word-of-mouth claims, but I'm going to stay on a straight path for this story. When we get to the cover-up parts, that's where things will get maybe a little murky. Regardless if you have a connection to this story or not, this hits close to home for a lot of us. So let's get this story rolling, as I know a few of my fans that knew of this episode have been interested in hearing my take on it, especially someone I look up to like an older brother. So without further ado, let's get into the horrific rampage of Gabriel Wortman, committed in her home of Nova Scotia. I'm going to do something a little different for this story. Usually I give you a little bit of a backstory of the person and how they got to where they were, but we'll save that for near the end. We're going to jump right into the day of the incident. Before this happened, unless you knew of Gabriel previously or anyone close to him, you may have known his history. He was most known for being a denturist in Dartmouth and in Halifax. He owned a business that made dentures for people. Some know him from this, and some know him of his dark past, to which eventually, like I said, we'll get to later. And his history is what led up to his massacre. For the first part of this story, I'm going to walk you through a detailed timeline of the incident, which lasted up to 13 hours long. And in the final part of this story, I'll break down the timeline to which the RCMP disclosed information to the public and their failed attempt to cover up the things they didn't want us to know. So on April 18th, 2020, Gabriel Wortman would begin his rampage in the little town of Portapique, Nova Scotia. Around 9 p.m., Gabriel and his common-law partner, Lisa Banfield, were both at his warehouse, which was located on Orchid Beach Road. This warehouse was like a giant garage, to which he stored cars and even guns. The two were here on around 10 p.m., to which the two got into a heated argument. Gabriel then assaulted Lisa, inflicting serious injuries. He then forced her into the back seat of his car, to which was a replica RCMP cruiser. However, Lisa managed to escape before things got worse. Gabriel then proceeded to set his warehouse on fire and then began his warpath for everyone in the community. he made his way to the Blair's residence, which was also on Orchid Beach Drive. It's thought that his motive was searching for Lisa. However, to each place he went and failed to find her, he shot the witnesses. At this house, he shot and killed Greg Blair. His wife, Jamie Blair, managed to call 911, alerting authorities that it was Gabriel that had shot her husband, and the call recorded sounds of gunfire. She also stated that there was a police car out front. Gabriel found Jamie in her bedroom, and he shot and killed her. And then he scattered logs across the living room floor and turned on the stove. He had planned to ignite the Blair's home. However, he was unsuccessful and left the premises. The Blairs had 2 sons, and they were safely hidden from Wortman before he took their mother's life. The 2 boys survived this ordeal. Around 10:15, the Blair children managed to sneak out of their home and flee to their neighbors, the McCulleys. It is this time that the Blairs and the McCulleys called 911. They advised authorities that the shooter was in a police vehicle. Lisa McCully had left her home to view the warehouse fire. Gabriel encountered Lisa, as when he approached her, he shot and killed her as well. All of this happened around 10:16 p.m. And also, going by Lisa's location from her cell phone, it shows she did indeed leave her home. Gabriel then made his way to Cobequid Court, where his rampage would continue. 5 of the residents of the court were found near the entrances, all shot and killed. The victims were Peter and Joy Bond, Jolene Oliver, Aaron and Emily Tuck. This was somewhere between 10:16 and 10:25 p.m. Then he made his way back to Orchid Beach Drive, right when he first started. He made his way to the Gluchin residence, and I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. He shot and killed Fran and Dawn after he parked his cruiser south in their U-shaped driveway, making sure the driver door was closest to the entrance. He then set their home on fire and moved on to his next targets. As far as we know, nowadays, there is no definite motive in the leading up to the incident. Wortman was developing increasing paranoia, financial struggles, and stress from COVID-19 pandemic. He also suffered from extreme aggression and violent need for control. With all that combined, something in Wortman broke, which led him to inflicting mass chaos and destruction in Portapique. So around 10:30 p.m., Wortman had already taken the lives of 10 people. Around this time, Andrew and Kate McDonald drove to the scene to see what was going on, not knowing of Wortman's attacks. They arrived at 136 Orchid Road, where Wortman's warehouse was, and on fire. Andrew called 911, letting them know of the fire. A minute after placing the call, the McDonalds could see the Gluchin home set ablaze. After leaving the home, Wortman drove south past his cottage, which was also on fire, and arrived at the home of E. Joanne Thomas and John Zhao. He shot and killed both victims, then proceeded to set their home on fire as well. Wortman then pulled up next to the McDonalds, which were still in their car. Both cars lined up with Wortman's passenger window next to the driver's window of the McDonald's. He then shot through the window, hitting Andrew. However, the shot wasn't fatal. The McDonald's managed to flee. Wortman gave chase, both cars proceeding north of Orchid Beach. The McDonald's managed to escape Wortman. The couple arrived at Highway 2, where they met the first responding RCMP officer. This all happened approximately around 10:25 to 10:30ish. Wortman was working fast and hitting all these homes in quick succession. Also, many of the residents had called 911. The RCMP were getting many calls of the events claiming the house fires and gunshots. So the RCMP really buggered this up because no one was on scene yet at this time. About 3 of them did show up though after 10:30. In Colchester district, to which Portapique resides, there was about 35 officers. The next district, which was the East Hands, Colchester and Cumberland counties east, had about 25 officers. After Wortman left the Thomas and Zhao residence, he made his way through a trailed dirt road on what was called Lot 287. When he entered this road, he was on the southern portion of Portapique Beach Road. He emerged from the woods and out onto his driveway of his warehouse location of 136 Orchid Beach Drive. This was around 10:40 p.m. and around this time, Corey Ellison had left his home to investigate the scene. He encountered Wortman, to which he was shot and killed as well. Corey had managed to take a picture of the warehouse fire, but the surrounding area was too dark to see Wortman. The forensic evidence determined, though, that Wortman shot him from his car and then got out and shot him a second time. Around 10:50 p.m., Wortman left the scene, traveling south to the Copquit Court intersection again, where he turned left and proceeded east to the Blueberry Field Road. Wortman had managed to flee to the area of Debert, about 26 kilometers, 16 miles from Portapique. He parked behind a welding shop to rest. Back in Portapique, officers were checking out residents and searching the area for Wortman, but by the time they figured out which way he went, he was already long gone. Around 1 a.m., RCMP had sent reports of the incidents to police agencies across Nova Scotia, stating Wortman was armed and dangerous. They also made it known he was in an old replica police cruiser. Around 5:45 in the morning, though, of April 19th, the next day, Wortman left his spot, leaving Debert, and drove north on Highway 4. He arrived at 2328 Hunter Road, which was about 42 kilometers, 26 miles from Debert. This home was owned by Alana Jenkins and Sean McLeod, to which Wortman knew. He shot both victims and then shot the family's dogs, and then stayed in the home for about 3 hours. Before he left their home, he set the residence ablaze. A neighbor of the area noticed the fire and went to investigate. Tom Bangley encountered Wortman leaving his home and was shot and killed. Around this time, RCMP located Lisa Banfield. She was hiding outdoors all night. When she felt it safe to leave her hiding spot, she arrived at a neighbor's home to call 911. She supplied RCMP with a photo of Wortman, confirmed he was indeed impersonating an officer, and held a picture of his replica police car. A BOLO alert was issued to all police in the province. This is short for Be on the Lookout. After he left Jenkins McLeod home, he drove south on Highway 4. He passed a woman named Lillian Campbell. Wortman noticed Campbell, turned the car around, and shot and killed her as well. This was in Wentworth Valley. Wortman's next destination was at a residence that he knew as well. Before he arrived at the Fisher's residence, Carol Fisher had received a call from her mother about the news of Portapique. She made sure all doors were locked after the call. Carol and Adam Fisher recognized Wortman by a Facebook post. Shortly after, Wortman had arrived at their home, ringing the doorbell. The couple refused to let him inside. Adam even warned him that he was armed with a 12-gauge shotgun and was not afraid to use it. After failing to gain entry, he decided to leave. Maybe he figured it was not worth it, or possibly heard sirens. At some point, though, on his way to the Fishers on Highway 4, he passed another officer. Corporal Peterson was on the hunt for him. However, he noticed Wortman's cruiser, but by the time he confirmed Wortman's location and turned around to pursue him, he was already long gone from the Fishers. This whole ordeal was a mass confusion for the RCMP. Communication was shit, and no one was blocking any roads. Yeah, sure, they made some barricades on some spots, but it was after Wortman was long gone. Maybe they figured he was still in the area of Portapique, but by the time they determined he wasn't, Wortman was already miles away. Wortman then made his way back to the community of Debert. His location was between the off-ramp of Highway 4 and Masstown. It is here he decided to perform a couple of traffic stops. Who knows why he decided this, but he pulled over 2 vehicles and then shot and killed both victims. These people were Christian Beaton and Heather O'Brien. This was around 10 a.m. Around 10:20 a.m., Wortman was recorded on a surveillance camera. He was seen passing through the town of Truro. In such a short time, he was moving fast. The theory is that he was making his way to his dentist clinic in Dartmouth. It's scary thought for me that if he made his way to the clinic, I only lived a couple minutes up the road from it. I can't imagine the horror that he would have committed if he arrived here. At around 10:30 a.m., he was recorded near Millbrook First Nation. He stopped long enough to change out of his jacket to a reflective vest. About 10 to 11, Wortman would pull up next to another officer at the intersection of Route 2 and Route 224 in Shubanakia. This was about, I'd say 50 kilometers, 30 miles from Debert, and only about 20 minutes from Truro. Officer Chad Morrison had planned on meeting up with fellow officer Heidi Stevenson. However, when he noticed Wortman next to him, Wortman had shot at least 4 shots at Morrison with his handgun. Morrison was injured and managed to flee down Route 2 and ended up at an empty paramedic station. Wortman kept going, making sure he was far enough away in case Morrison was able to give pursuit. Wortman managed to drive about 500 meters, 1,600 feet south into the junction with Route 224. Heidi Stevenson was coming from the opposite direction. Wortman had seen her before she did, and he collided head-on into her cruiser. The two exchanged gunfire for a moment until Heidi exited the vehicle through the driver's door. Wortman continued shooting at her until he eventually was up close and shot her point blank. He then took her gun and her remaining ammunition. However, someone would drive up to the scene. Joseph Weber noticed the collision and drove up to see if anyone was okay. He exited his vehicle and approached Wortman. Wortman made Weber get in the back seat of his cruiser, and while in the back seat, he shot and killed Weber. Wortman then lit both cruisers on fire and took off in Weber's car. Sometime after 11 a.m., Wortman arrived at another home of a resident he knew, Gina Goulet. Wortman broke into her home, shot and killed her as well, and while there he changed his clothes and stole her Mazda 3 and took off. Goulet's Mazda was picked up on a surveillance camera on the off-ramp at Elmsdale. Wortman's reign of terror would be coming to an end very soon. Wortman then pulled into the Elmsdale Petro-Canada to refuel before continuing onwards. An ERT vehicle arrived as well at the pumps, but at first the emergency response team didn't recognize Wortman. He decided to leave without fueling up. Obviously, he panicked and fled. He managed to make his way to Enfield, though, and arrived at the Enfield Big Stop and parked his car at pump number 5. Constable Hughley and McLeod arrived at the station as well and parked their vehicle at pump 6. The two noticed Wortman and got out of their vehicle and unholstered their guns and took aim at Wortman. When Wortman noticed this, he raised his gun, and it said he put the gun to his head. However, both officers discharged their weapons. Wortman was struck twice in the head, twice in the neck. 7 bullets made their way into his right arm and 1 in his left. He also had about 25 wounds in his torso. Wortman was dead at 11:40 a.m. and his terror was officially over. After 13 hours, Wortman had taken the lives of 22 people. 13 of the victims were found in Portapique, 4 of them in Wentworth, 2 in Debert, and 3 in Shubanakia. 8 of the victims were found in structured fires. Most of the victims were closely connected to Wortman. The rest were at random. However, as of 2026, Another victim would suffer because of Wortman. Clinton Elson passed away in May due to suicide. He struggled with PTSD from the shooting, as Corey Elson was his brother. Many thoughts and prayers go out to the families of the victims during the time and today with the loss of Clinton. After this incident, though, the biggest question is, why did it go on for so long as it did? Why did it take 12 hours into the shooting for RCMP to alert the public? And also, could have this been prevented? And the answer is yes. After the extensive investigation which lasted the rest of the year and into future years during the current time, the public did receive the answers to why this happened and how. However, what the RCMP failed at keeping a lid on the info they didn't want people to know. But before we get into that, let's do a little backstory on Wortman. Throughout his life, Wortman had a very difficult upbringing. Born July 5th, 1968 in Hamilton, Ontario, he grew up in a difficult family. His father was described as a manipulative and exposed Wortman to petty theft crimes. This is thought to have been one factor to shape Wortman. Later in his life, he developed traits of paranoia, manipulation, and having a controlling behavior long before his rampage. He suffered abuse from his parents and became an abuser himself. Reports indicate that he attacked his father once as an adult, and even in 2010, it's said that he threatened to kill both of his parents at one point. For his education, it is said during his school years, he aspired to become a police officer. However, he ended up being a denturist instead. He attended the University of New Brunswick when he achieved his career. However, despite succeeding in what some would say an rewarding career, the violent and destructive personality never went away. In 2002, Wortman pleaded guilty to assaulting a 15-year-old outside his clinic. He received 9 months of probation, which he was prohibited from owning any firearms, and he was made to undergo anger management. The legal system kept a record of his violent traits long before his 2020 shooting. He was already making a criminal name for himself. He also had been involved in many civil lawsuits against him and property disputes, usually over ownership or financial misconduct. Between 1998 and 2020, Wortman had at least 8 complaints against him by his dental patients involving sexual harassment and allegations where he offered free service if the patients had sex with him. Also, Lisa had claimed over their 19-year relationship, Wortman was very verbal and physically abusive to her, psychologically tormenting her and heavily controlled her life. Friends and family knew of the violence that went on in their home. Sometimes police were called to their home. Needless to say, the RCMP already had a big record on this guy. However, the system is heavily flawed. This guy should have been put away many years ago. There's one theory that is argued by the public and the RCMP, and that is the theory that Gabriel Wortman was an informant for them. Now, of course, the RCMP denied all claims that he had any special relationship with them. However, for one thing, all the allegations and lawsuits against him, it seems like he just got away with things. And also, it was also confirmed that he withdrew a large cash amount prior to the shooting, which is fishy itself. For the replica police cruiser, well, that's a whole ordeal itself. He acquired at least four Tauruses through federal government auctions. These vehicles were decommissioned cruisers. Usually, when an old cruiser is replaced by the government, they sell them through auctions, stripping them of everything police-related, and sell it as a basic car unit. 3 of his vehicles were 2013 models, and the 4th was a 2017, and this one was used for the 2020 incident. It is said he used tools to make some of the decals, however, acquired everything else through auctions or receiving them from connections within the police force. The uniforms are not sold legally, so how he really got the clothing is still a bit of a mystery, but it's obvious he had ways that the RCMP isn't disclosing. It's safe to assume that he had all this planned for a long time. It was just a matter of time when he was going to strike. This whole ordeal put shame to the RCMP. For one thing, they didn't officially alert the public about the attacks until 12 hours later. The only form of communication they used was making a post on Facebook and Twitter. Canada has a mandatory emergency warning system for things like this, but the RCMP failed to use it. Not to mention, they did a poor job at trying to contain the area, not blocking off roads in time and just overall confused on what to do. It's like they had no idea how to correctly do their job. Now, I'm not blaming all the RCMP because I'm sure there are some decent officers. However, the system itself is beyond flawed, and those running it seem too incompetent, but that's just my opinion. Ever since this incident, the Nova Scotia alert system is used for every incident like this and other types of scenarios. These alerts go off about news throughout the province regardless of where you live. This is labeled as one of the worst mass shootings in Canada, and it really made the RCMP rethink and restructure how they do things. This all could have been prevented if the system was better and the victims and their families wouldn't have had to suffer. After this incident, tighter gun laws were put into place. Assault-style light guns were effectively banned and handguns were banned from being sold or bought. At least 1,500 models and variants of semi-automatic, fully automatic, and specifically chosen firearms were classified as prohibited. As for the victims, many memorials and fundraisers were held throughout the country. Flags across the nation were lowered at half-mast, and the House of Commons even held a moment of silence for the victims. The CN Tower in Toronto, Ontario, illuminated the colors of blue and white, the colors of the Nova Scotia flag, and even shined the colors of red, blue, and gold in honor of Heidi Stevenson. Many GoFundMes were started to raise money for the victims' families for the use of funeral services and other needs. Due to COVID-19 at the time, mass gatherings were still banned, so instead, there were many virtual vigils online via Facebook and even CBC television. A permanent memorial was set up for the victims at the local church in Portapique. All thoughts and prayers continue to go out to the families that are still dealing with the pain from this incident. If you are dealing with stress, depression, or even mental trauma from this incident, or simply the loss of a loved one, domestic violence, thoughts of suicides, or thoughts of violence against others, please make sure you reach out to your crisis helpline that is in your area. For Nova Scotia, you can call 211 or 1-855-922-1122 for help of anything that you're struggling with. 1-855-225-0220 is for domestic violence. That is the end of this episode about the horrific mass shootings of 2020 in Nova Scotia. If you would like to read more details on this incident, as there were a lot of details I didn't mention, I'll put a link to the Mass Casualty Commission report, which covers the entire timeline. And I will say it's a very long and very dense report. However, it covers every second and every minute of the whole 13 hours and afterwards. I use that as my main source of information. I also would recommend reading the books 22 Murders and An Anatomy of a Cover-Up by Paul Palango. If you have any more stories you wish for me to cover in the future, please send them to northernnightmares@outlook.com. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to get notified when new episodes drop, because remember, this is your home for nightmarish stories throughout Canada and beyond. Next week's episode will be a little more fun, but just as scary and even disgusting. As we take a major jump back in time, we'll be starting our next big series about the worst pandemics in human history. So I'll see you soon. Sweet dreams, and remember, nightmares are closer than you think.